It's hard to believe it's already been a year since the Lost Media Wiki officially picked up the case for Slamfest 99, and 2 years since I first started researching the topic. And let me tell you, a lot has changed in the course of those 2 years. It all started with a tweet from Andre Segers that described a live-action Smash Bros. Battle that was streamed over the internet back in 1999, and hadn't been seen since. As the hype surrounding this topic grew, I decided it was a case I wanted to research, and started digging up old fan sites or flipping through Nintendo Power Scans, seeing if any content was available. While there wasn't much around, I did find a collection of images and write-up about the event, as well as the old Nintendo webpage where it was originally hosted. Over the course of the next several months, I made a handful of contacts with former Nintendo employees and video game historians from the time, that eventually suggested I contact leads I already checked, sending me in a circle for a bit. Following that year of my own research, in late May of 2021, the Lost Media Wiki was looking for its next on the hunt search with the community, so Dykate and myself collaborated on bringing this search to the server, and that's when things really started heating up. We started making a lot of connections to former employees from the company that streamed the event, OnStream Media, and the PR company that helped run it in person, Golan. While even more information about the history and publicity of Slamfest was discussed, we still weren't able to find any footage of the actual live stream. The only thing we knew for certain is that Slamfest did exist and that it was available to the public at one point in time. The question became, where do we look after 2 years of searching? Which is exactly what we're going to go over in this video. How far we've come since the last update and the progress that's been made. There are a lot of plot twists in this update, so just like with the last one, we're going to start off where we left off, after a phone call to OnStream Media that resulted in the rep not understanding what we were looking for. Following this phone call and how things slowed down at the end of 2021, once the new year came around, I made it a priority to follow up with old contacts I had attempted to reach out to months ago that never responded. I always felt like this was one of the biggest problems with this search, because it leaves too many questions unanswered rather than getting straightforward confirmation that someone does or does not have content from the event. There were 2 big names you might remember from the other videos, those being former CEO of Media On Demand, Charles, and the owner of a fan site where the first batch of Slamfest images came from, Kiang85. Thankfully, things finally moved forward with getting in touch, beginning with Charles, as after months of waiting for a reply, I checked my messages much later and discovered he had responded. I asked whether or not a copy of Slamfest could still exist in Media On Demand's archives, which merged with OnStream Media in the early 2000s. Charles' response was very short and to the point, stating, "Hi, sorry, I don't have access to that event," which was both a good and bad response at the same time. It seems like he was acknowledging that the event did exist, and possibly was in OnStream's archives, but that he didn't have access to it. This obviously needed a follow-up question asking if anyone would have access to the archive. I even name-dropped another CEO named Jeff that was confirmed to be at the company during this time by another employee. We still hadn't been able to contact Jeff at all yet, and I figured the two might know each other, so it was worth asking about to lend more credibility to the search. I didn't expect to hear back from Charles for a while, so I turned my attention to Kiang85, who is one of our oldest leads that we never tracked down. Up until this point, I had been messaging several different email addresses and social media accounts, but didn't know if these were run by the same Kiang we were looking for, or if the account owners even still used them. Well, believe it or not, I actually share a mutual friend with Kiang that I met during the time I spent researching the Purple Yoshi tech demo. He runs the website SM128C, and is still active online. So I sent him a message and asked if he had any reliable way to contact Kiang rather than looking through old accounts. I received a Facebook page in response, with details in the page that do match up to other profiles I found, so it seems like this all was the same guy. Unfortunately, the Facebook page hadn't been updated in years, so it's unlikely he would have seen my message. But this was still an important find because now I knew for sure we were on the right track. While I was waiting for these contacts to reply, the other on the hunt searchers were exploring more hands-on options, like looking through magazine scans and finding more sites, which is always a good idea when you never know what could show up. During this time, 3 new mentions of Slamfest were found on old fan sites, though they were mostly just passing mentions and it wasn't really groundbreaking news. But it's kinda gotten to the point where reaching out to anyone that recalls the event is worth a shot. All 3 of these mentions were written by users that stayed within the gaming and technology scene, so it seemed likely that they might know something, or could point us in a better direction. Contact was made on all 3. In addition to these new mentions that were found, we also discovered a couple new magazines, Game Fan and Game Informer, that specifically mentioned Smash Bros on the cover. Back in the earlier days of the search, we looked through any magazines that mentioned the game with the hopes that Slamfest would have been talked about in the article, and could lead to more contacts. The scan for Game Fan was located, but unfortunately, it doesn't mention Slamfest at all. But we weren't able to find any scans for the issue of Game Informer, so we put that one on the back burner until we could find a copy, and focused on other projects. This includes a user named Crazy Tom having downloaded huge datasets for GeoCities and looked through all the content for any mentions of Slamfest, as well as another group attempting to document any evidence that a re-upload of Slamfest had been on YouTube at one point, a claim that was mentioned quite a while ago. The claim stated that the stream was once available on YouTube or other content sharing websites in the mid-2000s, which has always intrigued me, but we couldn't find any evidence of another copy of the stream having been re-uploaded anywhere. I'm convinced a re-upload never existed in this way, and claims that it did are likely misremembering. So even though we couldn't find any evidence that it had been re-uploaded, and Crazy Tom didn't find any mentions of Slamfest in the dataset either, progress felt like it was steady for a while, until everything started falling apart in the coming weeks. One of my biggest contributions to the search was by way of contacts, searching for those old employee names who were affiliated with production, and hope that they have, or would know, where to get content from Slamfest. This is basically the backbone of any search, and isn't specific to Slamfest, but since the event was so small, there's only a finite amount of people who could help. For that reason, everyone who we reach out to that doesn't have content from the event, or can't pass on new leads to us, creates a bit of a roadblock. And in this case, we ended up with a lot of those, as I went down the contact list and crossed off nearly every name we had from all kinds of different affiliations. Firstly on our list was one of the editors from an old N64 magazine that contained photos of the event. We had been trying to get in touch with him for a while, thinking he might have some more photos or know where these shots came from. But some confusion regarding contact prevented us from reaching him until now. But after a short message asking about those photos, I was informed he doesn't have any content or leads to give. And this was one of our older leads too, so it was quite a letdown after all this time. Another notable encounter was a writer from an old fan site called Nintendorks, who had made mention of Slamfest in a post around the time the event took place. I always enjoy reaching out to users who were around during the time period that Slamfest happened, and it only increases the likelihood that they saved something from it, especially having mentioned it on the site. I ended up finding an active Discord server dedicated to the site, and asked a friend of the writer if he recalled the event or had any content from it. But unfortunately, he did not, and it didn't seem like anyone else in the community had even been familiar with Slamfest at all. I came up empty-handed with this lead too. Finally, in this round of contacts, a user on Twitter who knew about the search was looking through their old magazines and found an article in Nintendo Magazine System from Australia that discussed Slamfest. What's even cooler is how the article contained new pictures we've never seen before. This led me to believe there might have been some international content from Slamfest that had eluded us until now. I found the contact info for the magazine's editor and sent her a message asking about the event, but once again, there was no content to be had. However, the editor did suggest I contact Nintendo of Australia, as that's where she believed the pictures came from. And now, we hit a pause. While we were mostly coming up empty-handed, we were progressing in a general forward direction. But as time went on, it became more clear to me that it was unlikely our oldest leads were going to have anything from Slamfest, because so far, all the oldest people we've contacted weren't able to help. Before it was decided to make a new batch of contacts, I revisited some of those older ones just to close the books on them. Most notably, the two I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Media On Demand CEO Charles and the owner of the Zelda fan site with the original Slamfest write-up, Kiang85. Unfortunately, no matter how hard I tried to get a reply from these people, I just couldn't get them to say anything. The only contact I ever had for Charles was Facebook DMs, which are pretty unprofessional to begin with, but no matter how I worded my follow-up question or asked for more details, he would only read my message, as evidenced by the read receipt, but never reply. I have no clue if he's actually looking for a copy behind the scenes and just not telling me, but it really feels like a missed opportunity. It also would have been helpful to get more information about Jeff, who I also mentioned earlier in the video, because I've never found any contact for him either. But getting a response from Charles could have provided some insight. This is especially disappointing since a different Media On Demand employee was the first person to suggest I even contact Jeff to begin with. Moving on to Kiang, that's a different story completely, because for someone who we tried to get in touch with since the beginning of the search, I don't think it's going to happen. Over the span of several months, I messaged him on a variety of different platforms, and eventually stopped asking about Slamfest altogether, only looking for confirmation that he's the same Kiang as the owner of the fan site. I know now that he is, since the admin of SM128C confirmed it for me, but I wanted Kiang to tell me that, and he never did. I've checked these same profiles over the months as well, and it's clear he's active on them, so perhaps this search, or his old work, is something he's completely written off. We'll never know. That mostly does it for old contacts, and I felt like we could move forward without having to worry about old leads that we've neglected or missed. Though as I stated previously, there is only a finite amount of people that would be able to help us find it to begin with, so it's not like getting new leads is easy. One new contact on my list was Nintendo of Australia, that the magazine editor had suggested I reach out to, so that one seemed pretty easy. I actually found a marketing coordinator who currently works at the company, but unfortunately, yet again, as always, I never heard anything back, even having stated that a former magazine writer for Nintendo suggested I reach out. And if you're not surprised by how many times this has happened so far in this search, you won't be surprised by how the story progresses. We found a new person who worked at Media On Demand during the time Slamfest happened, and even another gaming historian who wrote a local article about the event. Neither of these people replied back to us either, but we were starting to think at this point that local writers and former Media On Demand employees wouldn't have anything from Slamfest to begin with, and they would only point us to a company we've already tried, like OnStream Media or Nintendo. This is kind of a hard concept to prove, and it's something we've only picked up on after having searched for so long. But it seems like the majority of contacts we've made all direct us back to people or companies that were directly involved in the event's production. OnStream Media, Golan the PR firm, and Nintendo. Even in the case of the email to Nintendo Australia that never got a reply, we believe that they probably would have directed us to Nintendo of America, because they probably got the visuals from Golan, who helped run the event. And Golan is another company we've tried on and off to contact but can't get through. Our creativity was wearing thin for who or where we could look for another new batch of contacts, but the community didn't give up. There were two interesting leads that came from thinking outside the box, and technically they're still ongoing, as the end goal isn't as simple as a reply. The first one is a little more conventional, and actually connects back to what I've been trying to do for years at this point: get in touch with Nintendo themselves and ask them about the event. While it seems unlikely that Nintendo would have anything from the event, since former employees I've talked to never suggested they would, I want confirmation of that from someone currently at the company, which hasn't happened. There was even a guy I found who used to run old fan sites that wrote about Slamfest and currently works at Nintendo, but he never replied to my messages. So in this instance, it was the least explored method that actually got us the farthest. Discord user rebroadcast posted in the search channel an image of a physical letter that they were sent in response to a letter they had sent to Nintendo, asking about Slamfest. I didn't think Nintendo would have bothered to send a reply, so it's cool that direct contact to the company was made. But unfortunately, the response is sort of typical, that Nintendo's focus is on troubleshooting and answering questions about Nintendo products and services. They did, however, suggest an online contact form that would be the best resource in trying to get an answer about Slamfest. So just as always, we did things by the book. Filled out the contact form, made the message concise, and even name-dropped the author of the letter rebroadcast was sent back as a way to seem more legitimate. And guess what? We never got a response back. I still think it's really cool that such a path was even explored to begin with, but it really sucks that we keep losing leads to Roadblocks. However, this wasn't our last effort with Nintendo, as a completely different idea was mentioned that would help spread awareness to the topic from the outside of the company. If you're familiar with the Nintendo community, then you're probably aware of Kit and Krista. They were hosts with Nintendo for years, and often showed up at their events and in their content. While it's unlikely either of them would actually have any content from Slamfest, we thought about bringing the topic to their attention, as it would be a good way to get more eyes searching for it, especially at the Nintendo level. Both Kit and Krista are pretty accessible and do a YouTube podcast series. I sent them a tweet a while ago that they never acknowledged, but they do have a Patreon and take fan questions for their podcast. There was even a segment in one of them that discussed preservation, so maybe in the future we can collaborate more with their audience and contacts to try and get more eyes on Slamfest. You might be thinking at this point in the video that all of this progress is a good start, and there is potential for Slamfest to be recovered, but there's no guarantee or solid leads that are currently in the works that could lead us to getting a copy. Well, there's still more to talk about, and these final leads could be the biggest hopes we have right now in getting a copy of this archived. One of the leads is a little older, and was happening around the start of the new year, while the second lead is much more recent, but has a lot of problems in how effective a search for it would be. Firstly is the older lead, that I personally had a hand in contacting several months ago. But let me tell you, it's been anything but fun. For a brief moment, I tasted Slamfest. I could imagine checking my email one day, not even thinking about the topic, and seeing a reply with a file attached ending the 2-year search. And if that did happen, this video would have been very different. There have been several times during this search where we've contacted the current iterations of companies like OnStream Media and Golan in attempts to get current employees to look around the servers and see if they can confirm or deny a copy having been saved. We've mostly failed doing this because the companies are so hard to reach out to, and surprisingly, a lot of them have really poor contact options, despite being so big. However, on the topic of OnStream Media, we had called the company in the last update video and received a reply from the representative stating that they weren't able to help us. But getting increasingly frustrated with this, I literally sat down one day and found 4 or 5 emails associated with OnStream employees that I blindly sent messages to asking about Slamfest, specifically whether or not a copy existed in their archives. Even with this, the majority of the emails bounced, so they immediately became dead ends, but a couple of them did go through. I didn't think much of these at the time, and figured I'd never get a response, but to my surprise, one of them did, and it was only a couple days after I sent it. The message came from one of the higher-ups at OnStream Media, though the reply was very short, simply stating, "I will pass this to my staff and see if it still exists in our archives. If so, they will contact you." But I guess I didn't need any more details than that. We finally got the inside lead we had been trying to find for months. Someone at OnStream Media is going to direct their staff to look for a copy of Slamfest, and even if they don't find it, we'll still have confirmation that it's not in their archives. I felt no need to reply to this message, as it very clearly outlines what will be done, and I didn't want to ask any more questions than I needed to. So I let OnStream do their thing, and waited along with the rest of the server. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited some more. Considering how quickly he got back to me the first time, I thought the results would have been equally as quick. He never said he'd contact me if they came up empty-handed, but I thought I'd get an update after so long. A month passed, so I decided to check in, assuming they came up empty-handed, and asked if there were any other places a copy might be, if OnStream wasn't able to find it. I even name-dropped the old CEO named Jeff, who we were never able to reach, thinking that would add more credibility to the search. But strangely, I never got a reply to this message either. 3 more months passed, and after consulting with the search channel on Discord, I sent one more message following up to see if any progress had been made, but this one also never got a reply. I have no idea what happened between the time I first messaged him and when he said his staff would look, but honestly, it's not really worth speculating about. This bothered me for quite a while, because it should have worked and we were right there. I don't know if he just said he would look to get me off his back, if he meant to tell his staff but forgot, or if the silence means they really didn't find a copy. You'd think if they came up empty-handed, he would have told me that in a reply to my follow-ups. What's really unfortunate about this lead is the fact that it doesn't give us any indication about whether or not OnStream actually has a copy. In my opinion, based on all the facts and conclusions we've reached so far, the most likely place for a copy to be stored is OnStream Media. It makes the most sense given their involvement and the fact that they have archives dating back to the 90s. No other company has given us any reason to believe a recording was saved. But even though getting information from OnStream Media has been difficult, it is possible we might be able to look elsewhere for a copy of the stream. In the previous video, we believed that it was unlikely for any home recordings of the stream to exist, whether that be a fan getting some footage live at the event, or a viewer recording it at home with a camera pointed at the computer screen. And while we still believe this to be the case, there's another homemade method that we hadn't even considered or heard about until a user came by the Discord server and made a claim that I believe could be the biggest hope yet for this search. A user named Brainbug made a claim that they remember watching Slamfest live on Real Player as it was originally hosted, but then states once the official stream was gone, a copy of it was rebroadcast for a couple years in the early 2000s on a Winamp pirate video stream, even going as far to say a few different rebroadcasts existed. As someone who doesn't know a whole lot about the technical side of media, I was confused at first, but thanks to Tommy's shadow, we can get a better understanding of what this means. These pirate video streams that Brainbug was referring to was an internet TV and radio service known as Shoutcast, provided by Winamp. It essentially gave users the ability to host their own channel and stream any kind of content they wanted to the internet, while viewers could watch. This was achieved through a directory of TV channels that users could tune into through the Winamp player itself, and according to some old posts, there was a large variety of content being streamed. This ranged from cartoons like Futurama and Family Guy to network TV shows, though some didn't even have a name and simply streamed random videos. There were several downsides to streaming in this format, however, including each stream having a maximum viewer count to limit the amount of bandwidth being used, and no chat features. Most notably is that once the stream ended, they disappeared without any way to rewatch them. These details about Shoutcast were interesting on their own, but they also acted as pieces in putting together the mystery of Slamfest having once been streamed on there. Brainbug claimed to have watched Slamfest by tuning into a Shoutcast TV channel, and that it was a direct copy of the stream and not a camera pointed at the computer. This means that someone had to have downloaded the official stream while it was on Nintendo's website and converted it to be rebroadcasted on Shoutcast. But without any way for viewers to record these broadcasts, that would mean only the host would be in possession of the video, and finding who that might have been, or even a channel that it likely would have been broadcast on, will be very difficult due to the scattered nature of the community back then. But this was the first step to breaking ground in the lead. Bozo, another active user of the search, was able to locate a directory listing of active Shoutcast TV channels at the time through the Wayback Machine, and from these channels, we were able to find many of the old websites and users who ran them. However, as Tommy's Shadows stated, there's so many of them, and with no indication that they broadcast Slamfest, it would be difficult to scratch the surface in contacting them. The biggest user we found, who might have had some insight about Slamfest, was someone named AVSFan, who had been streaming on Shoutcast for a decade. They were one of the people who hosted cartoon rebroadcasts, so Tommy's Shadow sent an email asking if they ever watched shows on Shoutcast in addition to hosting them, but we never heard back. While there could be more information and users to get a hold of in an effort to find more information about the Slamfest rebroadcast, it should be stated that as of now, there is no direct evidence to support that Slamfest was ever on Shoutcast TV, but that the claim from Brainbug sounds legitimate. The takeaway from this lead is that someone or several people out there could have had copies of Slamfest that were airing on Shoutcast. But with the communities having largely been broken up, there's no way to contact everyone that was a part of them, and no guarantee that this alleged host would even still have the video file at all. While there are a lot of reasons why this lead might not be considered viable, I can see the potential in it simply for how big and varied Shoutcast TV was back then. Not to mention, they didn't even introduce video to the platform until 2002, so if Slamfest was actually broadcast, it would have been 3 years after the recording was taken down from Nintendo's official site. That means whoever saved it, if that person exists, might have found it particularly funny or noteworthy as to preserve it. That's the person who could end this search, but similar to what this topic has been like from the very beginning, we need to find them first. If you have any information or leads, be sure to let me know in the comments, or post them in the On the Hunt channel in the Lost Media Wiki Discord server. Though be careful about false claims or leads that have no evidence behind them. Throughout this search, we've come across many stories that could not be proven to be legitimate, or claims that were straight up hoaxes. It does feel like we're getting closer and closer to finding someone with a copy of this stream, so hopefully we can solve this mystery and save a piece of Nintendo's past.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to check out some of my other Lost Media videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, Finn.